we don't know when it'll start, but we also don't know how long it'll take. It could happen very, very quickly, because the point about this objective-subjective relationship, when people realize that actually it's not the dollar which is the objective in terms of pricing everything, it's subjective itself. When people realize that, then I think the dollar is toast, and the whole of the fiat currency system on top of it. And going back to the point that you were asking about earlier, Daryl, this is why the Singaporeans, Chinese, and the Russians have been accumulating gold like Billio.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because they know it's real money.
In the first 9 months of 2023, central banks bought 800 tons of gold, marking a record high for any January-September period in WGC's data since 2000. Notably, Singapore's central bank emerged as the third largest buyer globally during this period, trailing only China and Poland, according to WGC. China's central bank, the People's Bank of China, took the lead in gold acquisitions, increasing its holdings by 78 tons in the third quarter alone, reaching 2,192 tons, constituting 4% of its reserves. Alasdair Macleod, head of research at GoldMoney, underscores the strategic significance of gold accumulation by countries like Singapore, China, and Russia. He contends that these nations view gold as a genuine and stable form of money, possessing the unique ability to anticipate future market conditions or challenges. Against the backdrop of these gold acquisitions, concerns about the US dollar's role in the global economy intensify. The dollar showed an 8% decline in global reserves last year, leaving many to wonder if the dollar will cease to be the currency of the global economy at some point in the future. MoneyWise reported that the US dollar has lost 98% of its purchasing power since 1971, but gold has maintained its value. Due to this loss of purchasing power of the dollar, according to Alasdair, this loss of dollar purchasing power challenges the conventional understanding of inflation. He argues that the commonly accepted 2% inflation target set by central banks masks the true decline in the dollar's purchasing power over time. Furthermore, Alasdair points to the diminishing influence of the US dollar on the global stage, citing foreign policy decisions, particularly referencing issues with Russia and Ukraine. This, coupled with the US potential withdrawal from global situations, as seen in Afghanistan, hints at a possible decline in its global influence. Stay tuned for clips from Alasdair Macleod's interview with As Good as Gold Australia, where he delves deeper into these issues. If you're interested in more insightful videos, hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell for regular updates. Thank you, and enjoy the video.
The value, if you like, of a fiat currency is entirely dependent on the faith in which people put in it. And so that objective-subjective relationship between gold and the currency is that gold is the objective value. That is not changing. The subjective value is the currency. That is the one that changes. That's the one that goes up, down. Normally the value goes down. I mean, I was actually looking at this for an article which will be released on Thursday for GoldMoney, and you know, the dollar since 1971 has actually lost almost 99%. It's 98.2% of its value. In terms of if you like, in terms of real money, what legally is money and what historically has been money. And of course, you tell this to people. They know that we've had inflation and all the rest of it, and we know that the central banks have a target of 2% inflation, which basically means that the purchasing power of the dollar over time declines. Well, but nearly 99%, I mean, you must be joking. You know, they don't actually realize what's been happening. So, I mean, that's, you know, the way to look at this is not in the sense that there are so many dollars outstanding and there's only so much gold, let us say, in the central bank's reserves. Therefore, you know, divide the number of dollars by the reserves in the central bank and you get a figure which should cover it. No, that's not the way to look at it at all. The relationship is this objective-subjective relationship between gold and a fiat currency. As to how long the current situation can continue, we see the debt trap. That's one issue. We see the central banks deeply in negative equity, which is something that can be fixed with the exception of the ECB. That's going to have a real trouble. So that's another issue. You've got commercial banks trying to reduce their exposure to the economy and things like commercial real estate and all the rest of it, and which could bankrupt this bank, that bank, whatever. That's another problem. You've got as energy prices are forced to rise by those nasty Russians and nasty Saudis and nasty Iranians, who may indeed close off the Straits of Hormuz, and close off the Red Sea if things cut up rough. But even without that, you're going to see, price inflation, headline CPI inflation rise. They'll try and fiddle the way out of it. They always do, but it'll still rise. And that's before we talk about the loss of influence that the dollar, the king dollar, has over the rest of the world, which is gradually being eroded by the mistakes that the American administration are making in their foreign policy. I mean, trying to stop Russia, contain Russia, conquer Russia. I mean, whatever the objective is immaterial, but the Ukraine is a disaster. I hear that there's a group of 50 countries which are supporting Ukraine, and a committee of these countries are now talking to Zelensky with a view to seeing to what extent a compromise with the Russians can be found, which will involve ceding territory to the Russians. I mean, do you think that Putin's going to sit there and say, oh, yeah, we can agree? No, what he'll do, because his objective is completely different, and that is to just get the Americans out of Europe, get the Europeans on his side, which basically means chucking the Americans out and us if we continue to behave as we do, like, the Russians' pet poodle. Not the Russians, sorry, the America's pet poodle. So you can see that that what's going to happen. I mean, I think that America will just walk away from it, just as they did in Afghanistan. That's 2 walkaways.
Last year, there were significant unreported increases in central bank gold holdings. Central banks that frequently fail to report purchases include China and Russia. Many analysts believe China is the mystery buyer stockpiling gold to minimize exposure to the dollar. There has always been speculation that China holds far more gold than it officially reveals. As Jim Rickards pointed out on Mises Daily, many people speculate that China keeps several thousand tons of gold off the books in a separate entity called the State Administration for Foreign Exchange, SAFE. Alasdair sees the possibility of a collapse in the fiat currency system, speculating on the strategic moves made by nations like China and Russia to protect themselves from what he sees as imminent challenges in the West. He recalls the bear market in gold in 1983 when Western nations sold out of gold. He points out China's strategic moves, accumulating gold secretly before allowing the general public to buy gold in 2002. By then, China may have amassed between 20 and 25,000 tons of gold for the state. Given their substantial mining operations, the People's Bank of China's declared gold reserves may not fully represent their actual gold accumulation activities in the market. Let's get back to the interview.
Collapse of the Western system. I mean, the interesting one, I think, in all this is Singapore, who have been building their gold reserves, I mean, very significantly. I mean, for a small island state, it's quite remarkable how much gold they have been buying. The one thing I would say about the Singaporeans is that they really do have their finger on the Asian pulse. They really do have, they understand the geopolitical situation. They understand, I mean, as a small island, they have to be very careful about how they protect themselves from us larger guys who, might bully them around. And they haven't really sort of sided with anyone. But the fact that they've been accumulating such large quantities of gold, I think is a very clear indication that they see what China is doing, they see what Russia is doing, and they see what America and the G7 are doing. And they can see, the dangers, if you like, in the 2 sort of opposite poles of a monetary approach. And anyone with half a brain looking at what's going on with the dollar and America's finances, Japan's finances, so I'm talking government finances, You know, the whole thing is actually set up for a complete collapse of the fiat currency system. And, you know, so what do you do if you're China and Russia and all the rest of it trying to build commercial power worldwide? Well, the answer is you've got to protect yourself from the follies of the West. And I think that's basically what's happening. And I would also add that, you know, the figures that we get for, you know, the sort of gold reserves, the increase in gold reserves are really part of the story, because a lot of these nations are also secretly accumulating gold and not marking them as central bank reserves. Now, remember that 1983, we had a bear market in gold, which took it from, I think the 1983 values were around about $400 or $500 an ounce, eventually down to about half that, with the West basically selling out of gold completely. You know, the Chinese government, through the People's Bank, which also incidentally had the monopoly on currency dealing in China, so it could switch, you know, play ducks and drakes between dollars and gold, whatever. I mean, the setup was absolutely clear, and consequently, I concluded that before the general public were allowed to buy gold. Remember that the general public were banned from gold ownership until 2002. But at that stage, suddenly the state turns around and says, right, the people can now buy gold. We'll set up the Shanghai Gold Exchange, which will be owned and run by the People's Bank as part of its legal mandate, which we gave them in articles, whatever, in 1983. Furthermore, we will advertise that people should buy gold. And on top of that, no gold was allowed to leave China. Now, by 2002, I reckoned that China would probably have accumulated somewhere between 20 and 25,000 tons of gold secretly for the state. In other words, people were then allowed to buy gold once the state had got its basic position. Now, it has obviously increased from then. Now, when you look at, for example, the People's Bank of China has been declaring, you know, constantly larger gold reserves. I mean, these figures don't really matter. We don't know whether the People's Bank has been in the market actually sort of accumulating gold, because remember, they're the biggest miners on Earth now.
Unlike fiat currency, gold's intrinsic value remains stable, independent of government or economic fluctuations. Gold is a reliable asset to safeguard purchasing power during periods of inflation, recession, or economic uncertainty. What are your thoughts on countries like China and Russia buying unprecedented levels of gold? Share your observations in the comments section below. Also, ensure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on post notifications for more videos like this. Thanks for watching.